Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about accountability. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, when management asks for accountability for work done by juniors or those who do not have plenty of experience in the work that they produce, do you believe that accountability naturally falls on those with the more senior team members? In South Africa, the common trend is that they say that seniors are accountable, but end up making the more junior staff feel bad until they leave. Well, I'm assuming here what you mean is basically that, well, people who are, the idea is that people who are more senior should take more responsibility, but in reality in South Africa, they actually do hold the juniors responsible in equal measure, and they simply sort of put those expectations. So it's not like, they're not putting it in types of proportion. It's basically the same for everybody. And that is not an uncommon stance to have, I'm very sorry to say to you. But I don't think it necessarily has so much to do with your region, like in South Africa. Like, I'm not going to speak for like all the world, but I make the argument that when this happens, it has to do with the evaluator, like the management in this case, because the evaluator does not have a good understanding of what to expect of like the thing that you're doing. As I like to say, like software developers are like wizards, and if you don't know how complex the magic they do is, it's really easy to just think of people like a unit of something, like, oh, there's a software developer here and there's a software developer there, and they can't evaluate how much to expect in terms of difference from the one who is senior versus one who is junior. Then it basically makes they start creating expectations, and what they usually will do is that they will use the case that they feel is appropriate to do the evaluation. To put it in a different way, if you were to put a professional athlete, like a marathon Olympic athlete, like say a runner or something like that, next to an average person, and then next to a really obese person. That would be the equivalent, in depending now on like scales, like all things considered, right? It would roughly be the equivalent of senior, mid-level, and junior in terms of how fast they can run. And that would be super obvious in terms of, like, even if you have never, you haven't done any training or anything like that, but you can pretty much imagine, like, by just looking at these three people, that yeah, their performance level is going to differ quite a lot. But here it's about something that is less obvious. It is about like intellect, knowledge, experience, all of these sorts of things, and these things are so subtle that it's very difficult to figure out, are these expectations that I'm putting on, say, a junior appropriate? You don't know. And so you're going to have to go with what I say most people go with, your gut feeling, and that is what the managers usually do. But in terms of what I think, I mean, as I said, this is unfortunate, but it is a reality. However, I do feel that I want to say that both of these two things are true. Like the thing that you're just talking about is the way it should work, that the senior should take more responsibility. But, and here's the thing, that doesn't absolve a junior or mid-level from doing a good job. So this is the thing, right? So if you want to play these things by the extremes, so one extreme would be to say that everybody should produce at the same level and all should meet the expectations that is equal to whoever is the best that you have on hand, right? Which is unfeasible, as I said with my little example here with the runners. But you can also go to the other extreme and say that, well, a junior can basically be at any skill level, be at any talent level, regardless of, like, and we should just allow that, regardless of how it goes. You could have the most incompetent person, like a person who doesn't have any aptitude or so forth, and just basically never gets anything done, and say that's fine because you're a junior. And that's not, in my opinion, that doesn't work either. Because what would happen in such a scenario is that you're basically doing, like, well, that's basically welfare. It's basically what it comes down to. You're paying a person because just for them to just basically try to do something that they might not be able to do. And as I've said before, guys, I make the argument to most companies that the question of should I invest and train a person versus should I get somebody else comes down to one thing is, of course, your circumstances. If you need someone to produce very, very quickly, then you don't have that option. But if you do have the option, evaluate the gap between where the person is and where you need them to be. If the training time is, if they need to learn a tool or like a specific method or something like that, that's easy. But if you're talking about someone who's consistently underperforming and can't meet the expectations that you have on them, it's never going to happen, most likely, or it will take years. Because it's the same thing with the runner. If you want an obese person to compete in the Olympics, you're not going to do that in one sprint. You're not going to do that in a year. It's going to take a lot of time to get to that level, and so that's the thing that that's the mental picture I want to paint for you. If the distance between let's say that you're a pretty rigorous amateur runner who's really has been trying for years and years and years, then maybe you just need a little bit of extra to get to an Olympic level or like a very close to it. So the distance there is it's not that great, right? But if it's at that scale, like your expectations are, then you have a mismatch in the terms of role. And so what I try to tell people is that if you ask me personally how I think you should compose expectations and how to set up teams and projects, I say pay people in proportion to the expectations that you put on them, and get people where the expectations that you put on them is measured correctly. That basically means that if you have, as I've said to many companies and managers before, if you have a high stakes project where the domain of your system is fairly complicated, it's a big system, or let's say it's a very critical system that has a lot of complexities and stuff like that, what I usually say is never hire anybody under a senior for that job. Because in many cases, I will go as far as to say that how easy it will be for you to add a junior software developer or a mid-level or something like that, it doesn't come down to your budget. But sure, you might not have budget for something more, but then you have to live with the consequences, basically. But it comes down to the state of your code, the state of the system, and the complexity of what you're doing. Again, like with the runners, if you need a person to run a really, really long marathon, then you can't pay an obese person to do that race. That hopefully feels very obvious, and it's the same thing here. If you need someone who is really, really good if you have a product that is very complicated, then hiring a junior is not the right fit. And that's why I tell people, if you do know how to run an IT company efficiently, you should be able to develop a system, ideally now. Not all systems can be built in this way, but the perfect state for you is to be able to create a state in the code base or in the delivery process that is simplified enough that you actually can add juniors. And so that comes down to the structure of the company, the structure of the source code, and the structure of the overall system. And so that's the thing that I argue for, that yes, a senior should take more responsibility as a rule, but every single person who joins the team has to be able to carry at least their own weight. And if they are able to do that, well, then usually I find that there are no problems here. That it's that mismatch where you, as I said, you put a person who is not capable of doing the work necessary in a given environment, and then your expectations are at a higher level than what they can produce, and that's, in my opinion, nobody's fault really, unless you're really, really ignorant. And as I said, with my little example here, if you don't see the difference between a really, really obese person and someone who's really, really fit, and you know for a fact that you're going to need someone who's really, really fit, and you still go with the obese person, well, then I don't know what to tell you. So what I want you to take away from this is that I argue that expectations and pay and so forth should stand in proportion to the individual that you're getting. So as I said, if you have a senior level software developer and they are paid as a senior level software developer, then you should be able to put those expectations on them. Otherwise you're paying more than what you're getting back, and that means that they should take responsibility for the state of the source code, all of these sorts of things, right? And so if they can't do that, if they can't handle the coding, or they can't onboard your juniors, or they can't set up things so that it works, fire them, because you're paid, they can't produce. and you can't train. Like, that's again, it comes down to how much training would they need. I would go as far as to say at a senior level, it's basically like a done deal. Unless it's like that they don't know a certain process or a certain tool, then get rid of them. Because at that point, it's not about like experience; it has to do with their aptitude. It's like, again, for sports people who they train their entire life, but they can simply not reach the level that they will need to reach in order to compete, say, in the Olympics or some event or something like that. And it's tragic to say, but some projects and some requirements that a business has is at a level where you need specific individuals. And that's what I always say to people: don't treat software developers as a unit. Treat them as football players or sports people. They are at different levels. Even if they all have this title senior, they're still going to differ. And it can differ a lot here. And then, as I said, if you're hiring a junior, know what it means to hire a junior, and make sure that you know that you can support a junior and that there is a structure around them so that they can, actually do the job. As it's, again, if you need to do surgery and you hire a nurse who's on his or her first year, and you want them to do like a brain surgery or something like that, you have the wrong person for the job. And that's not their fault. It's you who put them in this really, really bad situation where like they clearly need someone more experienced, but unless you're able to figure that out, well, of course they're going to crash and burn. So the best thing is, as I said, in this scenario, you need both in a doctor, a surgeon, and a nurse, so that they can work together. Because the person who has to do the really, really complicated thing can do that because they have the experience necessary, but that doesn't mean that you don't need the nurse. Same thing with developers. Just because if you have a really senior software developer, if your system is designed so that a junior can take part in that, that's a win for you, because you're putting them. It's the same thing with the runners. Maybe you you have two races. Maybe you have one that is at a really, really high level where you need a really super fit person, and in another one you literally need someone who just walks. Then the obese person will probably work. Have a great day.